I learned something important the day I almost died of thirst on a forgotten alien world. Sometimes the smallest act of kindness can rewrite the fate of entire star systems. The heat was brutal, pushing past 120 degrees Fahrenheit, the kind that dries the inside of your mouth until even breathing tastes like dust. My rover had died 6 miles back, its engine fried by a magnetic storm, and the only thing keeping me moving across that endless orange desert was a half-empty canteen knocking against my hip. Every step sank into powdery sand that reflected the light of 2 harsh suns, and the horizon shimmered like molten glass. I kept telling myself there would be shelter ahead, maybe an outcrop of rock or a cave, anything that could get me out of the heat long enough to call for rescue. That's when I heard it. A sound so faint I thought the wind had played a trick on my ears. A breath. Not the hollow whistle of desert wind, but the shaky inhale of someone barely hanging on. I froze and scanned the dunes until I spotted a patch of disturbed sand behind a jagged ridge of black stone. At first I thought it was debris from an old survey drone, but then a pair of luminous eyes blinked open. She was buried up to her neck in the sand. Blue skin, pale as twilight, cracked with dehydration. Fine silver markings traced along her temples like living starlight. Even half buried and exhausted, there was something unmistakably regal about her. Her gaze locked onto mine with sharp suspicion. "Human," she whispered, her voice dry and fragile but still carrying command. "Leave." Her accent rolled through my translator a half-second later. I crouched beside her, the sand scorching through my gloves. "You're not exactly in a position to give orders," I muttered, scanning the horizon for whoever had left her here. Nothing but heat waves and distant rock formations. She tried to lift her chin with stubborn dignity. "Go," before they return. The warning hung in the air, but it was her cracked lips that caught my attention. She hadn't had water in a long time. I unclipped the canteen from my belt and shook it gently. Maybe 2 mouthfuls left. Out here, that was the difference between making it another hour or collapsing in the sand. Myself. For a moment, I just stared at the metal flask in my hand, weighing survival against conscience. The desert didn't care about kindness. The desert rewarded selfish decisions. But those glowing eyes were still watching me, filled with pride even as her breathing grew shallow. "You're going to hate this," I said quietly. I tipped the canteen and let a thin stream of water touch her lips. She hesitated at first, like she didn't trust the offer, then drank slowly, every swallow bringing a faint spark of color back to her skin. When the last drop was gone, I lowered the empty flask and wiped sweat from my brow. "Well," I sighed, glancing at the empty canteen. "Guess we're both in trouble now." For a few seconds, she just stared at me, as if trying to understand something that made no sense. Then her fingers rose from the sand and wrapped around my wrist with surprising strength. Her eyes, glowing brighter now, held mine with quiet intensity, and in a voice steadier than before, she said something that would change my life forever. "Human, by the law of my people, you have given me life. Which means," she paused, studying my face with a strange mix of curiosity and certainty, "I am yours." For a moment, I thought the heat had finally cooked my brain. The desert had that effect on people. Too many hours under twin suns, and your mind started hearing things that were not there, seeing shapes moving in the glare, believing impossible words from a half-buried alien princess. I stared at her hand around my wrist, then at the empty canteen still hanging from my fingers. "You are what?" I asked slowly. Her grip did not loosen. Up close I could see the faint glow returning to her skin, a soft blue radiance like moonlight through water. The silver lines along her temples pulsed faintly, almost like they were responding to her heartbeat. She studied me with intense focus, as if measuring something invisible. "The water you gave," she said carefully, the translator smoothing the edges of her language into clear English. "It was not merely kindness. Among my people, water given in the moment between life and death creates a bond. The one who gives life becomes the one who is chosen." I let out a dry laugh and looked around the empty desert. "Lady, I am just a survey engineer who crashed his rover 6 miles back. I think your traditions might have picked the wrong guy." She shook her head slightly, sand shifting around her neck. "The law does not choose wrong." The confidence in her voice was unsettling. A few minutes ago she had barely been able to breathe, yet now there was calm authority in every word. I reached down and started digging the sand away from her shoulders with my gloved hands. The grains were hot enough to sting even through the material, but little by little her upper body came free. Beneath the sand, she wore what looked like a damaged travel suit made from a flexible metallic fabric that shimmered in the sunlight. It was torn along one side, but still intact enough to protect her from the worst of the desert. "You said someone might come back?" I said while clearing more sand away. "Who exactly buried a princess out here in the middle of nowhere?" Her glowing eyes drifted toward the horizon for a moment. "Those who believe the throne should belong to someone else." I paused. "That sounds like a long story." "It is," she replied quietly. After a few more minutes, I finally freed her arms and helped her sit upright against the black rock. She moved carefully, still weak, but recovering fast now that she had water. The air shimmered with heat waves, and the wind carried the dry scent of mineral dust across the dunes. I wiped sweat from my forehead and glanced at the empty sky. "Well, Your Highness, if anyone is looking for you, we should probably get moving before they decide to check back." She looked at me again, studying my face with the same quiet curiosity as before. "You do not seem afraid." I shrugged and clipped the empty canteen back to my belt. "I ran out of water, and I ran out of good options about an hour ago. At this point, helping an alien princess might actually be the smartest decision I have made all day." Something that almost looked like amusement flickered across her features. Then she slowly stood with my help, taller than I expected, and brushed the last of the sand from her suit. The wind shifted suddenly, carrying a faint, distant vibration through the air. At first I thought it was thunder rolling across the desert. But when I looked up at the sky, I realized the sound was getting closer. The vibration in the air grew stronger until I could feel it through the soles of my boots, a low mechanical hum rolling across the desert like distant thunder. I tilted my head and listened carefully, the way you do when something in your gut tells you the day is about to get complicated. "Please tell me that sound is friendly," I said quietly while scanning the sky. The princess followed my gaze, her luminous eyes narrowing slightly against the harsh sunlight. For a moment she said nothing, but the calm expression on her face changed in a subtle way, the kind of shift you only notice if you are paying very close attention. "No," she replied at last. "It is not friendly." That was not the answer I was hoping for. The hum deepened into a sharper tone as something metallic cut through the bright sky above the dunes. A small craft appeared first, sleek and dark against the twin suns, gliding across the atmosphere with the smooth precision of advanced technology. It circled once at high altitude, almost like a hawk surveying open ground. My instincts told me we had been spotted. "All right," I muttered under my breath, already scanning the nearby rock formations. "So the people who buried you came back to check their work." The princess stood straighter beside me now, the last traces of weakness fading as the water continued restoring her strength. Up close I could see the faint glow and the silver patterns on her skin growing brighter, almost as if her body was waking up after a long sleep. She placed one steady hand against the dark stone wall beside us, thinking quickly. "They will search the area," she said. "If they confirm that I am alive, they will attempt to capture me again." I raised an eyebrow. "That sounds like a polite way of saying we should leave immediately." She turned toward the horizon where the desert stretched for miles of shimmering sand. "There are caves 2 miles east of here, old volcanic tunnels beneath the surface. My ship was hidden there before the ambush." The word ship immediately caught my attention. "You have a ship?" "Yes." I pointed toward the sky where the dark craft was beginning another slow circle. "Then I vote we go meet your ship before your enemies decide to come down here and start asking questions." She studied me again, that curious expression returning for a brief moment. "You continue to help me without hesitation." I shrugged and adjusted the small navigation scanner on my wrist. The screen was cracked from the earlier storm, but still functional enough to show direction and distance. "Look, Princess," I said calmly. "I already gave away my last water to someone with royal problems. At this point, helping you escape is probably the only way I get off this planet alive." For the first time since I met her, a faint smile appeared on her face. It was subtle, but it changed her entire expression, softening the sharp authority in her eyes. "Then we will survive together," she said. A stronger gust of hot wind rolled across the dunes, carrying with it the rising whine of engines from the craft above. That was all the motivation I needed. 2 miles east," I said, pointing toward a ridge of black volcanic rock in the distance. "Let us move before they decide to land." The princess nodded once, and without another word we started across the burning desert, two strangers walking side by side through a sea of orange sand while an enemy craft watched from the sky above us. The desert felt even hotter once we started moving, like the planet itself had decided to remind us who was really in charge. Every step sank a few inches into the powdery sand, and the heat rising from the ground shimmered through the air like waves above a highway in midsummer. The princess moved beside me with surprising steadiness for someone who had been buried alive not long ago, her long strides careful but confident. The faint blue glow in her skin had grown stronger, and the silver patterns along her temples pulsed gently as if reacting to the environment around us. Above us, the sleek search craft continued circling, its shadow occasionally sliding across the dunes like a silent warning. "They are scanning," she said quietly while keeping her eyes forward. "The vessel carries atmospheric sensors. They will be searching for heat signatures and movement." I wiped sweat from my brow and glanced at my damaged wrist scanner. The screen flickered but still showed a rough compass heading. "Good thing this desert is basically a giant oven," I said. "Everything out here is a heat signature." She considered that for a moment. "Your species is very strange," she said. "You show humor while facing danger." I let out a dry breath. "Trust me, it is either humor or panic, and panic does not help anyone walk 2 miles across a desert." The black volcanic ridge ahead of us slowly grew larger with every step. Up close it looked like the broken spine of some ancient creature rising out of the sand, jagged rock formations casting narrow strips of shadow that felt almost cool compared to the open dunes. The wind shifted again, bringing with it a faint mineral smell and the distant hum of the craft above changing direction. The princess slowed slightly and studied the sky. "They are narrowing their search. That means we should probably move faster," I replied. My boots crunched against darker ground as the sand began thinning near the ridge. Small pieces of volcanic glass glittered beneath the sunlight, reflecting tiny flashes of light across the rocks. We reached the base of the formation and slipped into a narrow passage between two towering slabs of black stone. The temperature dropped almost immediately, the shade offering a brief moment of relief from the brutal heat. I leaned against the rock and caught my breath while listening to the distant engine noise above. It was louder now, echoing faintly between the cliffs. The princess stepped deeper into the shade and placed her hand against the stone wall, closing her eyes for a moment as if listening to something far away. The silver markings on her skin brightened slightly. "The tunnels are close," she said after a moment. "The entrance should be somewhere along this ridge." I followed her deeper into the rocky corridor, scanning the ground and walls for anything that looked like an opening. "So just to be clear," I said while stepping over a fractured slab of obsidian, "we are heading into underground tunnels to find your hidden spaceship while an unfriendly aircraft circles above us. That is the current plan." She opened her eyes and looked at me with calm certainty. "Yes." I nodded slowly. "All right then. Just making sure we both understand the situation." A low shadow suddenly passed across the narrow canyon entrance behind us, and the distant engine sound deepened again as the craft above descended slightly. I looked up toward the bright strip of sky visible between the cliffs. "We might want to find that tunnel entrance soon," I said quietly. The princess stepped forward another few yards, studying the rock face carefully, and then she stopped. Her hand brushed across a smooth section of volcanic stone that looked no different from the rest of the wall. For a second nothing happened. Then a faint blue light flickered beneath the surface of the rock. The faint blue light beneath the rock pulsed once, then spread across the smooth volcanic surface like veins of soft electricity. I stared at it for a second, unsure if I was looking at advanced alien technology or if the desert heat had finally started messing with my vision. The princess kept her hand pressed against the stone, her glowing skin matching the light beneath the surface almost perfectly. "Stand back," she said calmly. I did not argue. I took 2 steps away just as the rock gave a quiet mechanical hum. The blue light intensified and a thin seam appeared in the stone, perfectly straight from top to bottom. A moment later the entire section of the wall slid silently to the side, revealing a narrow passage descending into darkness. Cool air drifted out of the opening, carrying the faint metallic scent of machinery and recycled oxygen. It felt like stepping into a refrigerator after hours under the desert suns. I exhaled slowly and looked at her. You hit a spaceship inside a mountain. She turned slightly, her expression composed. It was the safest place during my exploration mission. I glanced back toward the canyon entrance where a slice of bright sky was still visible between the rocks. The distant engine hum above us had grown louder. Well, I said, gesturing toward the passage, today I am extremely grateful for that design choice. Without hesitation, she stepped inside, and I followed close behind. The temperature dropped another 20 degrees as we moved deeper underground. The walls of the tunnel were smooth and curved, not carved by natural erosion, but clearly shaped by precise technology. Soft blue lights embedded along the ceiling activated one after another as we passed, illuminating the corridor with a calm glow. My boots echoed faintly against the polished floor. After about 50 yards, the tunnel opened into a wide cavern carved directly from the volcanic rock. And there it was. The ship rested at the center of the chamber like a piece of art built by someone who had never heard the word compromise. Its hull curved smoothly like liquid metal frozen in motion, reflecting the pale blue lighting of the cave. It was about 60 feet long, sleek and elegant, with wings that folded along its sides like the fins of a deep-sea creature. Even without knowing alien engineering, I could tell it was fast. Very fast. I let out a low whistle. You were not kidding. The princess walked toward the vessel, her posture naturally shifting back into the quiet authority I had first noticed when she spoke. This is my personal exploration craft, she said. It is designed for speed and stealth. I walked around one side of the ship, running my hand lightly across the smooth surface. The metal felt cool despite the heat outside, almost alive with faint vibration beneath my fingers. And here I was thinking my rover was impressive, I muttered. A soft mechanical tone echoed through the cavern. The princess paused beside the ship and looked toward the tunnel entrance. They have detected the access door, she said quietly. My head snapped up. You mean the aircraft above? She nodded once. The calm in her voice had not changed, but the silver lines along her temples had brightened again. They are deploying scanning drones. I stared at the tunnel we had just entered. Then I think it is time to start that ship. The princess stepped toward a section of the hull and placed her hand against a glowing panel. The metal surface shimmered and opened smoothly, revealing a small ramp lowering to the cavern floor. She looked back at me with that same steady gaze she had given me in the desert. Come, she said. If you saved my life once today, you might as well see how far that decision carries you. The ramp touched the cavern floor with a soft metallic click that echoed through the underground chamber. I followed the princess up the narrow incline, glancing over my shoulder once more toward the tunnel we had just come through. The distant hum outside had changed again. It was sharper now, broken into several smaller mechanical tones. Even without alien technology experience, I could guess what that meant. Multiple machines were searching the area above us. The interior of the ship felt surprisingly calm compared to the burning desert outside. Cool air circulated through the cabin, carrying the faint scent of polished metal and something almost like clean rain. The lighting shifted automatically as we stepped inside, thin lines of pale blue illumination running along the curved walls. The design was smooth and elegant, nothing like the cramped industrial interiors of human exploration vehicles. There were no visible switches or bulky control panels, only seamless surfaces and softly glowing interfaces that appeared as we approached them. The princess moved with quiet confidence through the small corridor, clearly familiar with every inch of the vessel. I followed closely, still taking in the strange beauty of the craft. You keep this thing hidden inside a volcano tunnel, and nobody notices? I asked. She glanced back briefly. The entrance is shielded from most sensor scans. Unless someone knows exactly where to search, it appears as solid rock. I let out a slow breath. That is very comforting information considering the aircraft above us. We reached the forward section of the ship where the cockpit opened into a circular control area surrounded by curved transparent panels. Through the glass, I could see the dim cavern walls and the tunnel entrance far behind us. The princess stepped toward the center platform and placed her hand against a glowing control surface. Instantly, the entire cockpit came alive. Light flowed across the consoles like liquid energy, and a soft hum spread through the floor beneath my boots. Power systems activating, she said calmly. I leaned against one of the curved support rails and listened to the quiet vibration building inside the ship. It felt steady, controlled, like a powerful machine waking from sleep. I am beginning to appreciate alien engineering, I said. The princess studied a series of floating symbols above the console. The vessel was placed in standby mode when I left it. Systems are still fully functional. I looked out through the cockpit glass toward the cavern entrance. The distant tunnel now carried faint flickers of moving light. Small hovering drones drifted slowly into view, their metallic shapes reflecting the blue glow from the tunnel walls. I assume those are the scanning drones you mentioned, I said quietly. She followed my gaze for a moment, but did not appear alarmed. They will attempt to map the tunnel structure. They will eventually discover the ship. Then we should probably not still be parked here when that happens. The princess nodded and moved her hand across the console again. The ship responded immediately. A deeper vibration rolled through the hull as the engines began warming beneath the floor. Outside the cockpit glass, the landing ramp slowly retracted into the body of the vessel and the outer hatch sealed with a soft mechanical seal. The interior lights dimmed slightly as the navigation displays brightened. I stepped closer to the forward glass as the ship gently lifted a few inches from the cavern floor, hovering silently above the smooth stone. It felt almost unreal. Just an hour earlier, I had been walking alone across a desert with an empty canteen and a broken rover. Now I was standing inside an alien royal spacecraft preparing to leave the planet with a princess who claimed I had somehow become part of her destiny. The princess turned toward me briefly, her glowing eyes calm and focused. "Hold on," she said softly. The ship rose another few feet from the cavern floor as the engines gathered power, and the nose of the vessel slowly angled toward the tunnel leading back to the open desert sky. The ship moved forward with a smoothness that almost felt unreal, gliding through the cavern as if gravity itself had politely stepped aside to let it pass. I braced one hand against the curved support rail while watching the tunnel entrance grow larger through the forward glass. Outside, the narrow volcanic corridor glowed faintly blue from the ship's lights reflecting against the polished rock. The scanning drones had drifted farther into the tunnel now, small hovering machines shaped like dark metallic spheres, moving slowly as they projected thin beams of pale light across the walls. "Those things look curious," I said quietly. The princess studied the displays hovering above the console, her hands moving through the floating symbols with careful precision. "They are mapping the interior structure," she replied. "Their operators will soon understand that this cavern contains more than empty stone." I folded my arms and looked ahead again. Then I guess we should not be here when that discovery happens. The ship continued forward, the hum of the engines deepening slightly as the vessel gained momentum. One of the drones drifted directly into our path, its sensors glowing brighter as it detected the approaching craft. For a moment it hovered there as if trying to decide what it had just discovered. The princess did not hesitate. Her fingers traced a quick motion across the console, and the ship accelerated smoothly. The drone moved aside just in time as the vessel slipped past it and entered the wider section of the tunnel leading back toward the desert surface. Light from outside began to spill down the corridor, bright and blinding compared to the calm glow inside the ship. The princess glanced briefly toward the sky through the glass canopy. "The search vessel is still above the ridge," she said. I leaned forward slightly, squinting through the bright opening ahead. The desert stretched beyond the tunnel mouth like an ocean of burning gold beneath the twin suns. High above, the sleek search craft hovered against the sky, its dark silhouette gliding slowly across the horizon. "That thing is going to notice us," I said. She nodded once. "Yes." There was no fear in her voice, only calm calculation. The ship reached the end of the tunnel and paused for a fraction of a second just inside the shadow of the rock. Outside, the open desert waited under the blinding sunlight, waves of heat rising from the sand in endless shimmering patterns. The princess adjusted the controls again, and a translucent layer of energy shimmered across the surface of the cockpit glass, slightly distorting the reflection of the sky. "Stealth field activating," she explained. I raised an eyebrow. "You mean we can just slip away without being seen?" "We will become difficult to detect," she said carefully, "but not invisible." The ship drifted forward out of the tunnel and into the open desert air. Sunlight flashed across the hull as the vessel rose quietly above the volcanic ridge. From up here, the endless dunes stretched for miles in every direction, glowing orange beneath the twin suns. For a brief moment it felt like we had escaped unnoticed. Then the distant search craft changed direction. Its nose turned sharply toward us, and the low engine tone grew louder through the atmosphere. I watched it for a second inside. I am guessing they noticed something unusual. The princess kept her eyes on the navigation display, her expression steady. They have detected the energy signature of the stealth. Feel. The engines beneath the floor vibrated more strongly as the ship began climbing higher above the desert. The search vessel accelerated in response, its sleek frame cutting across the sky like a hunting bird closing the distance. I glanced from the approaching craft back to the princess at the controls. "So," I said slowly, "out of curiosity, how fast can this ship go?" She finally allowed a small confident smile to appear. "Fast enough." Then her hand moved across the console, and the engines roared quietly to life as the vessel surged forward into the open sky. The ship shot forward across the desert sky like a silver arrow, the engines humming with quiet but unmistakable power beneath the floor. I felt the acceleration press gently against my chest as the dunes below us blurred into long golden waves of heat and shadow. The princess remained perfectly calm at the controls, her glowing eyes scanning the floating displays that surrounded the cockpit. Behind us, the dark search vessel adjusted its course again, closing the distance with determined precision. Even from several miles away it looked fast. Very fast. I leaned forward and watched the horizon stretch endlessly ahead of us while the navigation numbers shifted rapidly across the display. "That thing is not giving up," I said. The princess nodded once without looking away from the console. "They will not stop until they confirm whether I survived the ambush." The ship climbed higher, rising through the thin upper layers of the atmosphere. The desert world beneath us began to look smaller now, the ridges and dunes turning into vast patterns of amber and shadow stretching toward the horizon. The air outside the glass canopy deepened into a darker shade of blue as the vessel continued accelerating. I folded my arms and studied the approaching craft on the rear display. "So these people chasing us," I said carefully, "they want to capture you because of the throne you mentioned earlier." She answered without hesitation. "Yes. The royal council will soon choose the next ruler of my people. Some believe the choice should not be me." I raised an eyebrow. "That sounds like a complicated family meeting." A faint hint of amusement touched her expression again. "You could describe it that way." The ship vibrated slightly as another burst of power flowed through the engines. The navigation display shifted, and a new series of symbols appeared above the central console. The princess studied them for a moment before adjusting the controls again. "We are leaving the lower atmosphere," she said. I glanced upward through the canopy. The sky above us was no longer blue. It had faded into the deep velvet darkness of space, where distant stars were beginning to appear one by one like scattered sparks of light. The curved edge of the planet stretched across the horizon behind us, glowing softly beneath the twin suns. I had spent years working survey missions across remote colonies, but the sight still stopped me for a second. There was something humbling about watching an entire world fall away beneath your feet. Then the rear display flashed again. The pursuing craft burst through the upper atmosphere behind us, its engines burning bright against the darkening sky as it followed our path toward orbit. I pointed toward the screen. "They are still with us." The princess studied the data calmly. "Their vessel is fast, but it is not designed for deep space pursuit. I am guessing this one is." She nodded slightly. "Yes." The ship continued climbing until the last traces of atmosphere disappeared and the engines shifted to a quieter, steadier tone suited for vacuum flight. Weightlessness tugged lightly at my balance as the vessel adjusted its orientation. Outside the glass canopy, the stars now filled the entire sky in every direction, brilliant and endless. The princess entered a new sequence into the navigation system, and a glowing map of nearby star routes appeared above the console. I studied the holographic chart, realizing we were about to leave this entire system behind. "Where exactly are we going?" I asked. She paused for a moment before answering, her glowing eyes reflecting the starlight beyond the cockpit. "Home," she said softly. Then the engines surged again, and the ship accelerated toward the open stars. The stars outside the canopy stretched endlessly in every direction, cold and brilliant against the black ocean of space. The ship moved smoothly through the void, its engines humming with a steady rhythm that felt almost peaceful after the chaos of the desert. I stood beside the cockpit rail watching the distant planet shrink behind us, its amber deserts now nothing more than a glowing marble drifting beneath twin suns. For a moment it felt like we had truly escaped. Then, the rear display flashed again. The pursuing craft had followed us out of the atmosphere and into orbit, its silhouette growing clearer against the star field as it accelerated. I let out a slow breath. "You know," I said quietly, "most of my survey missions end with paperwork and a long ride home. This one escalated very quickly." The princess studied the navigation console, calm as ever. The soft blue glow from the displays reflected across her skin, making the silver patterns along her temples shimmer like tiny constellations. "Their vessel will attempt to intercept before we enter faster than light travel," she explained. I glanced at the holographic star map floating above the controls. Thin lines of light stretched between distant systems, forming a network of routes that looked more like art than navigation. "And once we enter faster than light?" I asked. She moved one hand through the hologram, selecting a distant star that glowed softly near the edge of the projection. "Then they cannot follow." The engines beneath the floor shifted tone slightly as the ship continued accelerating through the darkness. The stars outside began to stretch subtly as our velocity increased. I folded my arms and studied the approaching craft on the rear display. It was still several miles behind us, but it was closing the distance faster than I liked. "I assume there is a reason we have not already jumped to that star," I said. She nodded once. "The drive requires a stable trajectory and sufficient distance from planetary gravity." I looked back toward the shrinking world behind us. "Let me guess. We are still too close." "Yes." The pursuing vessel flared brighter on the display as its engines pushed harder to close the gap. The cockpit remained calm and quiet, but the situation felt like a silent race unfolding across millions of miles of empty space. The princess entered a new sequence of commands into the console, and the star map shifted again, highlighting a curved path leading away from the planet's gravitational pull. "We will reach the jump point in approximately 60 seconds, she said. I leaned closer to the glass canopy and watched the stars drifting slowly past. 60 seconds suddenly felt like a very long time. Behind us, the enemy vessel continued accelerating, its sensors clearly tracking our energy signature. I rubbed the back of my neck and laughed quietly. "You know something funny?" I said. She glanced toward me briefly. "What is that?" I gestured toward the empty canteen still clipped to my belt. "This entire adventure started because I gave away the last water I had in the desert." For the first time since we had left the planet, the princess allowed a genuine smile to appear. It softened her serious expression in a way that made her seem less like a distant royal figure and more like someone who had simply survived a very long day. "That decision may change the future of my entire empire," she said softly. I shook my head and looked back at the rear display. The pursuing craft had closed to within visual range now, its dark shape gliding across the star field behind us. "No pressure then," I replied. The navigation console chimed gently. The princess turned her attention back to the controls as the highlighted route on the holographic map began to glow brighter. "We have reached the jump point," she said calmly. Her hand hovered above the final command on the console. The engines deepened to a powerful, steady vibration that filled the ship with energy. Outside the canopy, the stars seemed to stretch slightly as space itself began to ripple around us. The princess looked toward me one last time. "Hold steady," she said. Then her hand moved forward, and the ship leapt into the unknown. Space folded. The stars outside the canopy stretched into long silver lines as the ship surged forward faster than light, leaving the desert world and the pursuing vessel far behind in an instant. For a few seconds the cockpit filled with a soft humming resonance that vibrated through the floor and into my boots, like the universe itself had become a living engine carrying us forward. Then the motion stabilized. The streaks of light outside softened into a glowing tunnel of distant stars, flowing quietly past the glass canopy like a silent river of fireflies. I exhaled slowly and released the support rail I had been gripping without realizing it. Well, I said quietly, that was different. The princess stood calmly at the console, studying the glowing symbols drifting across the navigation display. The silver patterns along her temples pulsed gently in rhythm with the ship's systems, as if the vessel itself recognized her presence. We have entered faster than light transit, she said. I looked out through the canopy again, watching the strange luminous corridor stretching ahead of us. It did not look like movement through space. It felt more like space itself was flowing around the ship. You know, I said thoughtfully, human exploration vessels take months to cross a distance like this. Your ship just did it in about 3 seconds. She allowed the faintest hint of amusement to touch her expression. Your species advances quickly. You will reach this level of travel one day. I leaned against the rail again and studied the holographic map floating above the console. The star we had selected earlier glowed brighter now, and the path between systems appeared as a shifting ribbon of light guiding the vessel forward. So how far are we going? I asked. She adjusted the display slightly before answering. Several hundred light years. My home system lies beyond the outer frontier of this region. I raised my eyebrows. That is quite a long trip to take, because you shared a canteen with someone in the desert. She turned her head slightly, meeting my eyes with that same steady gaze she had shown from the very beginning. You did more than share water, she said quietly. You chose compassion when survival would have allowed you to walk away. I shrugged. It did not seem like a difficult decision. For many beings, she replied softly, it would have been. For a moment, the cockpit fell silent except for the gentle hum of the engines carrying us through the corridor of light. The stars flowing outside the canopy looked almost alive, stretching and bending in slow, graceful patterns as the ship traveled between worlds. I studied the princess again. The calm authority she carried had not changed, but now there was something else in her expression. Gratitude, respect, perhaps even curiosity. Back in the desert, I said, you told me that giving water created some kind of bond in your culture. She nodded once. Yes. I folded my arms thoughtfully. And you said that meant you belonged to the one who saved your life. Her glowing eyes remained steady as she answered. That is the ancient tradition. I looked back out at the flowing tunnel of stars and smiled slightly. You know, where I come from, giving someone a drink of water usually just means they say thank you. The princess studied me for a moment before responding. Her voice carried a quiet certainty that made the words feel heavier than the vast distance we were traveling. Among my people, she said, it means destiny has already begun. Outside the canopy, the light of a distant star slowly grew brighter ahead of us as the ship continued its silent journey across the universe. Time moved strangely inside faster than light travel. The stars outside the canopy no longer looked like distant points of light, but flowing rivers of color stretching endlessly ahead of us. Sometimes the tunnel shimmered with faint shades of blue and silver. Other times it pulsed softly with waves of pale gold as the ship adjusted its course along invisible currents of space. The engines beneath the floor continued their steady hum, powerful yet calm, like a heartbeat guiding us across the universe. I leaned against the support rail and watched the distant star ahead slowly growing brighter on the navigation display. So that is your home system, I said quietly. The princess followed my gaze toward the glowing point on the holographic map. Yes, she replied. The Valerian system. My people have lived there for thousands of years. I studied the star chart more closely. Several planets circled the bright central sun, each marked by faint rings of light that represented orbital stations and cities. Even from this distance, the system looked busy, alive with activity. That looks like a lot of traffic, I said. She nodded slightly. My world lies at the center of many trade routes. It is a place where many species travel. I looked back out through the canopy where the flowing corridor of light continued rushing past us. That must make things interesting when there is a royal succession involved. Her expression grew thoughtful for a moment before she answered. It does. The silver patterns along her temples dimmed slightly as she considered her next words. The council believes a new ruler must lead our people through a time of change. Some wish for a leader who values strength above all else. I raised an eyebrow. And they do not think that leader should be you. She shook her head slowly. I believe leadership requires understanding, patience, and cooperation with other civilizations. I smiled faintly. That sounds like a dangerous opinion in politics. She glanced toward me again, the soft glow of the console lights reflecting in her eyes. My father believed the same thing. The quiet respect in her voice told me that memory carried weight. I looked back at the map of her home system drifting above the console. Your father was the previous ruler. Yes, she said. He guided our people for many years before his health began to fail. The engines shifted tone slightly as the ship adjusted its trajectory. Outside the canopy, the glowing tunnel began to fade as the star ahead grew larger and brighter. The navigation console chimed softly. We are approaching the exit point from faster-than-light travel, she said. I straightened and looked ahead. The flowing corridor of light narrowed, focusing into a brilliant point directly in front of the ship. Brace yourself, she said calmly. The stars snapped back into normal space in a silent burst of light. The sudden stillness felt almost surreal after the strange motion of faster-than-light travel. Outside the canopy, an enormous golden star burned at the center of the system, surrounded by several planets glowing softly beneath its light. Orbiting the third world was something even more impressive. Hundreds of ships moved through the space above the planet like schools of silver fish, while massive ring-shaped stations circled the world in perfect symmetry. I let out a quiet whistle. That, I said slowly, is a very busy home. The princess studied the scene with calm familiarity. But then something unexpected appeared on the forward display. Several large vessels detached from the outer defense ring and began moving toward our position. Their shapes were sleek and powerful, arranged in a precise formation. I glanced toward her. Please tell me those ships are friendly. She watched the approaching fleet carefully before answering. They are the Royal Guard. I folded my arms and leaned closer to the canopy. And are they here to welcome us? Or arrest you? For the first time since we left the desert planet, the princess hesitated before speaking. The fleet continued approaching in perfect formation, 6 sleek warships gliding through the darkness like polished blades reflecting the golden light of the system's star. Their hulls shimmered with faint blue energy patterns that matched the royal insignia now appearing across the navigation display. The cockpit grew quiet as the princess studied the incoming signals. I watched the ships growing larger through the canopy, their silhouettes unmistakably powerful compared to the small exploration vessel we were flying. They definitely know we are here, I said slowly. She nodded once, her hands resting calmly above the console. Yes. A soft tone echoed through the cockpit as an incoming communication signal appeared on the display. Symbols from her language flowed across the screen, translating automatically into English beside them. The princess read the message carefully before responding. Her voice remained steady. Royal Command Vessel Ardent Star requesting identification confirmation. I leaned slightly closer to the console. That sounds official. She allowed a faint smile. It is. Her fingers moved through the floating interface, and the ship transmitted its identification signal. For a few seconds, the only sound in the cockpit was the quiet hum of the engines maintaining our position in orbit. Outside the canopy, the massive defense stations circling the planet rotated slowly beneath us, each one larger than anything I had ever seen in human space. Ships of every shape and size moved between them like a living network of commerce and travel. This was not just a home system. It was the center of an entire civilization. The communication panel chimed again. The princess listened to the reply, and this time her shoulders relaxed slightly. I noticed the change immediately. That is a good sign, I said. She nodded. They have confirmed my identity. I exhaled slowly. So the Royal Guard is here to escort you home. Yes, she said. But her expression remained thoughtful as she glanced toward me. The lead warship of the formation slowed and moved directly ahead of our vessel, positioning itself like a guide. The other ships spread outward in a protective arc around us. Their presence felt less like a threat and more like a shield now, escorting us safely toward the planet below. The princess guided the ship forward, matching the course of the lead vessel as it began descending toward the third planet. The world beneath us grew larger with every passing second, its surface covered in deep blue oceans, vast emerald continents, and sprawling cities that glittered along the coastlines like constellations on the ground. I stared through the canopy, trying to process the scale of everything I was seeing. Your home is beautiful, I said quietly. She followed my gaze toward the planet below. It is the heart of my people. The warships guided us through a corridor of orbital traffic, past enormous stations and shipyards where vessels the size of cities drifted slowly through construction frames. Finally, the lead guard ship transmitted new coordinates, directing us toward a large floating platform suspended high above the atmosphere. The structure resembled a circular palace made of silver and crystal, surrounded by smaller escort ships and glowing landing lanes. The royal citadel, she explained softly. I nodded slowly. Of course it is. As our vessel approached the platform, hundreds of lights illuminated across its surface, forming a path toward a landing bay at the center. The princess guided the ship gently downward until the landing platform rose beneath us. The engines quieted as the vessel touched the surface with a smooth, controlled motion. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Outside the canopy, I could see rows of uniformed figures waiting along the landing deck. Royal guards, advisors, and officials stood in perfect formation beneath the towering structures of the citadel. I looked at the princess beside me. I guess this is where things become official. She met my eyes with calm certainty. Yes. The hatch behind us began to open with a soft mechanical sound. Outside, the leaders of an entire alien empire were waiting. The hatch opened slowly with a soft mechanical sigh, and warm light from the citadel platform spilled into the ship. I stood beside the cockpit rail for a moment, watching the rows of waiting figures outside through the widening doorway. The landing deck stretched out beneath towering silver arches that reflected the golden glow of the system's star. Hundreds of guards stood in precise formation along the platform, their armor shining softly beneath the lights. Beyond them, officials and advisors waited in elegant robes that moved gently in the artificial breeze of the station. It looked less like a military reception and more like the opening moment of a ceremony that had been prepared for a very long time. The princess stepped forward first. The calm confidence she carried inside the ship now returned fully, transforming her posture into something unmistakably regal. The faint blue glow in her skin brightened as she approached the open ramp, and the silver markings along her temples shimmered like living starlight. I followed a step behind her, suddenly aware that my dusty survey jacket and empty canteen probably made me the least official person ever to arrive at an alien royal palace. The moment she stepped onto the platform, the entire formation of guards lowered their heads in unison. The movement rolled across the landing deck like a silent wave. One figure in deep ceremonial robes stepped forward from the line of advisors. His posture carried the quiet authority of someone used to speaking for an entire government. He bowed slightly before addressing her. "Your Highness," he said, "the council believed you lost." The princess stood tall beneath the towering lights of the citadel and answered calmly, "I survived." The official looked relieved, but also curious. His gaze shifted briefly toward me standing beside her. "We detected a pursuit vessel leaving the frontier world. We feared the worst." She turned slightly, her glowing eyes meeting mine for a brief second before she faced the council again. "The attempt failed," she said, "because someone chose kindness when he had every reason not to." Suddenly, every pair of eyes on the platform turned toward me. Hundreds of alien officials, guards, and advisors studying the human who had arrived beside their princess. I raised one hand awkwardly. "Hello," I said quietly. The princess stepped closer to the council leader and spoke with clear, calm authority. "On a desert world far from this system, I was left without water and without protection. This human gave me the last water he had, knowing it might cost him his own life." A quiet murmur passed through the gathered officials. She continued, "According to the oldest law of our people, the one who gives life in such a moment becomes bound to the one who receives it." The council leader straightened slowly as understanding crossed his expression. "The water bond," he said softly. The princess nodded. Then she turned slightly toward me again, her voice calm, but filled with quiet certainty. "Daniel Carter of Earth did not save a princess that day. He reminded our people what leadership truly means." The council leader looked between us for a long moment before finally smiling. "Then perhaps destiny has brought exactly the ally our empire needs." I rubbed the back of my neck and glanced out across the enormous city world glowing beneath the citadel platform. A few hours earlier, I had been walking alone across a desert with no water, and a broken rover. Now I was standing in the center of an alien empire beside a princess who believed a simple act of kindness had changed the course of history. The princess looked toward the endless lights of her home world and spoke quietly enough that only I could hear. You once told me that on Earth, giving someone water simply earns a thank you. I smiled faintly. That is usually how it works. She glanced toward me again, her glowing eyes filled with warmth and certainty. Here, she said softly, it begins a future,